Welcome to this new Tech Captains podcast. Today we are joined by RJ Kedziora, a key figure in tech innovation. So, as co-founder and partner at Estenda Solutions, Richard has been instrumental in advancing digital health since 2003. So it's been quite a while. He's also known for his role as CTO at Saturn Care, where he developed the innovative platform for chronic disease management. Additionally, Richard co-founded, and that one is unusual, a Better Cake, offering healthier snack options. So with a career spanning various tech roles, Richard brings a wealth of experience and insights into the future of digital health and technology entrepreneurship. Really a serial entrepreneur. So Richard, let's hear about you, your remarkable journey and vision, and to start, like, tell us more about your current company.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Pleasure being here today. It's been a while since anybody's mentioned a better cake. It was an interesting journey for a couple of years there, trying something different on the side than software development. But baking is just as much as like software development is formulaic. It's okay, how much flour, how much sugar that you put into it. So a lot of people are sort of surprised, when I go from tech to baking and like it's really the same formulas. It's all about formulas and data. So here at Estenda Solutions, co-founded it over 20 years ago. We've been focusing on digital health, software development, data analytics solutions for a mix of clients from large Fortune 50 medical device manufacturers to startup organizations. And it's always revolved around the idea of data. And 20 years ago in healthcare, there was not a lot of data. Healthcare has always embraced the idea of technology, but much more around diagnostic, so the x-rays, the MRIs, those types of things. But EMRs didn't really come into their own until much later. So as I think and reflect now on the 20 years, it's always interesting that I can talk about 20 years at Estenda. At the beginning, it was like, how do we gather more data to create a better picture of that patient and make decisions with that limited amount of information? Fast forward 20 years now, and there is a tsunami of data. There is so much data that is available now. So instead of trying to figure out how to make decisions, it's now, okay, what data is important and relevant to the information, to the healthcare provider, to the patients, to make better care decisions. But even, as I reflect on those 20 years kind of thing, I actually graduated in the early 90s with a comp sci degree. And even before that, I was fortunate in the early 80s for my parents to purchase a computer at an IBM PC Junior. So
I see,
very
but
early on.
we'll get back to that. I'm quite interested into your beginnings and how you got to where you are. But like, just to continue on Understand Our Solutions, who are your clients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a mix of large medical device manufacturing companies. So diabetes is where we got our start, still very much engaged in that area. Other medical device manufacturing data, as you're gathering, blood glucose, blood pressure, sleep data, medication adherence information. We do a lot of EMR integration, but then also some startups. And it's really, we focus on the R&D groups, the innovation side of the business. And in that journey, it's our customers are people who usually have an idea, a concept, something that they're exploring, and we help them explore that idea. In healthcare, as you can imagine, it's one thing for a bunch of people in a room to say, okay, we think this approach will work. We think we can improve patient health. We can improve the decision making, the algorithm to treat a patient with a particular condition. But then it has to really go to a clinical trial. And we have several PhDs on staff that can help us plan those clinical trials, can do the data analysis afterwards to see if we really made a difference, and then publish the papers in various clinical
I
journals.
see. I see. No,
here.
that's interesting. But like, there was also something else I saw. So when I look, at your LinkedIn and I investigated a bit what's Estenda before the podcast. Um, I saw like so the company's been there for 20 years, like you said. You are 30 something people, and nowadays it's quite unusual for a tech company. It was much more common, I'm sure, in when you started, but today it's much more common, and you see a lot of those companies. They either get bought out by bigger groups, or they get a huge influx of private capital that to grow them and then sell out. So, like, how did you manage to keep the company like this, which is in a way, I don't know if that's something a term that you like, a lifestyle business.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a lifestyle business. And internally, even from a culture perspective, we emphasize, family first. And, there's always something going on, and there's always the software, the job's always going to be there.
Yeah,
So let's make sure your family's first, and we can manage around that. There's never a good time to take a vacation. So let's plan, take the vacation, we'll plan around that. And we've been fortunate with our customers and clients over the years that they have similar philosophies in that to be able to manage projects. The first 10 years of the organization, we got started with military healthcare and actually a congressional grant through the Joslin Diabetes Center for the development of a diabetes management solution. So we worked with people like the Walter Reed Army Medical Center, the Boston VA, the Indian Health Services, which is the government organization here in the US that's responsible for the Native American Indian here. So, in those early stages, when we would find new clients, new customers, it was always like, okay, how do we pay for this? And we would go and get grants together through, military healthcare, which has a healthy granting program, through the National Institutes of Health, extensive grant programs. We've done some R01 studies, which are like 5-year clinical trials to really prove out that a solution has worked. So we've been fortunate to be part of those. Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and other private entities over the years have been able to do that granting. And then probably in 2010 to 12, 13 kind of thing, we morphed into somewhat more of a commercial focus. We still very much do the grant-based software development, but now help more commercial entities, the Fortune 50 companies, exploring solutions for them. So I enjoy the challenge of taking on those R&D projects and innovating and discovering and figuring out solutions. So as a more as you termed it, and I think it's accurate, a family style business these days. It gives us those opportunities to explore things that interest us.
Well, actually, one thing I was going to, I mean, so, and is Estenda software only? Because you were talking about medical devices. Have you sort of done any involvement with some hardware projects? Or have you tended to stay away from that? Because there is the old jokes like, if you're an actor, don't work with women and children. If you're in tech, don't go anywhere near hardware, right? Just build software. So, yeah.
Yeah, so we did years ago become ISO 13485 certified, which is the standard for quality systems related to medical device software when you go to the FDA and other regulatory bodies. But we haven't done anything on device. We've always dealt with data off the device. As that information is coming off the device, how do we generate value around that information?
And now, RJ, let's go back to a bit in the past and like to tell us how you started. So you had a computer science degree from university, and like, did you start very young before the degree, or like how did that go?
Yeah, it's that goes way back, and we would probably be here hours talking about all those stories. But yeah, I was fortunate. My parents were able to purchase a computer, and when I was in seventh grade, it was an IBM PC Junior. It had an infrared keyboard, so you could be across the room, and then so you could actually see the monitor at a 20-point font. So it was rather amusing. But you could, and friends had the Commodore 64, and we had the Atari. I was the first person to play the games. I loved playing all the games. Spent plenty of time growing up playing computer games, but was also very intrigued by the power of what computers could do. So I started programming, very early on, my own little games, graphics to the extent that you could do stuff back then. But just really exploring what was possible. So going into college, I knew I wanted to program. It was clear that that's what I wanted to do going into university. And even I had a goal, interestingly, of getting a PhD in artificial intelligence. That was, even in high school, going to university, I'm like, I am going to get a PhD in artificial intelligence. And that was the early days in AI, not at all what it is today. But then, interestingly, I got my job as I was getting ready to graduate and started looking at that paycheck versus, a lot of student loans and, 3 or 4 more years of college. And I was like, and decided to, switch gears and went into more the professional programming around.
Yeah, and just to kind of random things, I was looking at your profile. I noticed you have a certification for the psychology of digital behavior change. I was curious as to what is that exactly. I have a vague idea what it might be, but I'm probably a bit off.
Yeah, that was my personal journey. You can't really tell here, as you're listening to, or you might see video, but I did lose like a little more than 50 pounds at one point in my life after I got married. So you look at those wedding pictures and it's like, oh wow. And it was a combination of eating better and exercising. And I race triathlons now, kind of thing. So over the years, I've been able to maintain that and everything. But it's really about behavior change. And everything that we do in digital health, a lot of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, if you can eat better and move, it's not even about exercising, walk. Everyone talks about, parking a little further away when you go to the store, and so you got to walk a few more steps. Those things are important. And so, yeah, when I went off and got that certification kind of thing, it was really about that, to learn and explore more about the idea of behavior change. How do you drive that change in people's and individuals? The U.S. here has an obesity crisis. And a lot of that is driven by our behaviors and healthcare. The healthcare expenses are through the roof in the U.S. and quality of care is probably not as good as it could be. There's not, in my opinion, not a lot of personal accountability for your healthcare these days. And so the more we can drive that behavior change and increase the accountability, I think the better off we're all going to be.
So how much of that, because there was a famous book, wasn't there? I think it was called Nudge, which talked about, it was quite a big book about, 15 years ago. And in fact, actually, it might have been longer than that, because here in the UK, one of the governments we had actually set up a nudge unit at one point. And so they were trying to take elements of this to drive, behavior in the general population, whether it was going to the doctor or littering or whatever, right? And I don't know whatever happened to that unit. I suspect it got shut down. But this digital behavior, I'm assuming, is some elements of that, but using digital devices or a digital medium to do it.
It absolutely is. And here I'm located in Philadelphia. University of Pennsylvania has a nudge unit there too that is very actively doing research. Because that's what it is. It's not, you don't need to make a big change, I'm sitting here today, on a couch and eating my Doritos and, drinking, a liter of Coke a day, to then tomorrow, start running and completely change your diet is intimidating. That is a hard thing to do. So how do you make those small incremental changes over time? And I just saw a meme yesterday, like a 1% change every day is it's small, but over time that adds up really fast. You don't have to change everything overnight. Change from regular Coke to Diet Coke, and those types of things makes a difference.
So then, just a slight change. Then I saw a report. I think it was on the website for your company around the HIMSS this year, HIMSS conference, and it talked about security and specifically concerns around medical devices. So how do you think that should be addressed? And it's kind of interesting because I have a story here myself, in that I went to see a doctor for, actually it was for a COVID shot, and they took me into a back room, and I'm sat there and I look in the corner and there's a sheet of paper printed up with all the logins to all the systems. So, I mean, we're dealing with people who don't understand, just regular people who aren't technical people, nurses, doctors, and it's very challenging, isn't it? So how do you think that this should be addressed?
It's an interesting challenge because it's not all technical, just as you pointed out.
Right.
It would have been very easy for a dishonest person to grab that sheet or take a photo of it and then be able to do something. And it wasn't about technology, it was about humans and behavior. So when you look at cybersecurity, there is an aspect of people and process. Let's make sure we have those things in place. We do here at Estenda and other organizations in the same space look at, and as we're developing solutions, think of security first, privacy first type of focus. So as you're designing these solutions, making sure you're keeping them in mind. And as part of our ISO process, it's very template checklist driven to make sure that you are thinking about all the things that you need to think about. And you may decide, okay, this particular thing we're not going to address today, but you've thought about it. You've made a conscious decision then. And another part of it is training from the software developers and the quality assurance groups to train them in security principles. And that's where you have to start from the ground up.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be a cultural change, doesn't it, in a lot of ways? And then I saw a term. Again, is what I love about doing this podcast and the research is I read things I've never read before. So there's IOMT, so Internet of Medical Things, which I didn't realize. And so if you look at IOMT specifically, I think there are concerns about PHI, personal health information. So you have patient monitoring, services like that. What do you think about that more specifically? Because I think that's really growing. I suspect your business has probably been involved with some of those initiatives, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's definitely growing, and it's the access of that which excites me. The access of that data is becoming passive. So, as I've been doing this for 20 years, I wore some of like the early heart rate monitors and things like that, where it had various leads that would be under my shirt kind of thing and it was just hard to wear. You didn't want to, but now there's the Apple Watch and the Aura Ring and several other, products like that you just don't think about as you're wearing them day to day, and are capturing all of this information about you. And yes, those things, those tools, those technologies have to include the ideas of security, because what happens to that data? Where does it go? and you can learn all sorts of information about an individual. They've looked at things of like, in not specifically medical, but cell phone tracking data, and people have been able to figure out where U.S. Army bases are around in the world, because they've been able to track that information. So unwittingly, you could be revealing information about yourself, your surroundings, and what's going on. The Apple tag.
But it's not just where it goes, is it? It's also who owns it, because you have the patient, you have the software provider, you have healthcare providers in there that might touch it. So depending on the context, the rights for the data and who owns what can be quite complex, can't they? Really complex.
Yes. In the EU GDPR, which we deal with in numerous projects, I think has a better approach to it. There is a lot of things that you have to deal with and factor in, kind of thing, and it's overhead in a software development project. Does make things more difficult, more time consuming, but for a very good reason. It's about the privacy of the data and who owns that. Here, in the U.S., we do have the HIPAA, privacy protection laws around just that. So we do the same thing. But also with all the different U.S. states, there are growing different guidelines. We've got California and Florida and Massachusetts, Texas, driving different regulations. So as it's sort of scattered, You have to take a best of breed approach, and okay, we need to do more than these individual states, more than what the guidelines say in a lot of cases, to make sure that we do have our bases covered, and that information is protected. Security first, zero trust architectures, as you're building these solutions, to make sure that the wrong person isn't seeing the data, even if it's internal. Again, it's a lot of cybersecurity breaches and stuff like that happen internally. You've heard
definitely people
stories over the years of a particular celebrity going to a hospital, and well, their data's in that EMR, and people could start looking it up. You shouldn't be doing that. So really protecting that information from the ground up is a good approach.
RJ, before we get to your book recommendation, I still had a question on your professional career, because without saying your age, you started as a developer in the 90s, early 90s. So, and then you quickly decided to become an entrepreneur, right? So, like, how did you make that decision, especially at a time where tech was kind of starting and it wasn't so trendy? Like, there's that saying that, 20, 30 years ago, if you wanted to be cool in high school, you had to belong to a band, and now you have to be a tech
Yes,
entrepreneur.
it definitely, when I was in high school, being that techie person was not the cool thing to do, which always made it interesting. But I think one of those things that has helped me differentiate myself in my career, and led me to where I am today in terms of entrepreneurship and my own business, and driving projects, is technology is important in to understand how to do software development, and understand Java or .NET or whatever language you might be programming in, or cloud platform that you're working on. Very important to understand the technology and how to apply it. But it's more so about the communication, and empathy for others. And that's, the sooner you can realize that. So as you're earlier in your career, understand the domain, learn how to take good notes. When you come out of a meeting, understand what you need to do to advance that project, and you don't forget anything, are hugely important. And then just start writing. It's very easy to do that today. Back when I was in college, you really started, you're still writing out your essays on, pen and paper kind of thing. I was the only person on my floor in the dorm room which had a computer and a printer. So there was always somebody in my room typing stuff up late at night. It was like,
you had a printer.
we
Wow,
definitely had,
that's amazing.
computer labs where you could go and do that. But at midnight, 1 a.m, you didn't want to go to the computer lab. You go to RJ's room, kind of thing. So I had a lot of late nights because people were there asking questions.
That makes sense. And then, like, prior to this podcast, so we asked you, like as for every guest, a book recommendation. You had a few. Some of them were already mentioned in the podcast. But fortunately, you seem to be an avid reader, so you came up with one that you quite enjoyed, which is called The Mythical Mammoth: Essays on Software Engineering by Fred Brooks. So let me ask you, why that book?
Yeah, it is. I took the opportunity to listen to a couple of your podcasts before this, and I'm pretty sure it was the person right before this that mentioned The Clean Coder, which I think is an absolutely great book. But I'm an avid reader of technology, of behavior change books, science fiction in general, to better understand the world and learn. It's one of those things you need to continually do, and there's always some new idea out there, and how do you apply it? And as I was reflecting on the book, the Mythical Man Month came to mind very quickly, and then I went back and looked at it, and it was published the year I was born, which is pretty crazy. And so that's over 50 years now. But read that book today. It still has a lot of salient, important points that you can apply day to day in software development. It's like, if your project's late and you have 2 people on it, you can't add 2 more people and get that project done overnight. You've increased the number of people in that project, the amount of communication that has to happen, and all those things take time. So you're not adding more people to a project to get it done faster. That was 50 years ago that people were talking about it. He also talked about the idea of understanding your data. And the earlier you can do that, the better off you're going to be. And fail fast. I think of it as learn fast as opposed to failing, but learn fast. And so if you can model your data right, understand those relationships between the data and your workflows early on as you start developing your code, you're going to be better off. And then he doesn't use the words agile, but that's what that speaks to. It's how do we be agile and develop solutions as quickly as we can. And at Estenda, we think of it as how do we add value as quickly as possible to the picture.
I was trying to think for a way to shorten this question. It ended up kind of been rambling in my mind. So I listened to one of your, you do a lot of podcasts, and I listened to one of them, and you were talking about the challenges of the training biases, right? Of training data biases. And I listened to that, and then I also happened to see a post on LinkedIn where a lady doctor, was talking about forceps that were invented, I think, at the beginning of the 20th century, and she said no woman would ever have invented these to be put into a woman, right? Which I thought was probably true. And then I thought about a guest we had on. We had a gentleman called Tobias from Kira Medical, who are doing amazing here in the UK. You'll probably hear them in the US, I should think, at some point. So they're doing breast cancer detection using AI, and they're achieving great results, right? But one of the things that was interesting is we talked with him about this, and he said, well, we're doing some work with African-American women to remove that bias. But the bit I thought about was, I wonder if they're testing this on men, because 3,000 men a year get breast cancer. I mean, it's a tiny number compared to 250,000 women, but it's still 3,000 men get this, right? And hundreds of them die. But would anyone think of that? It's a pity Tobias isn't here to answer that question. And I thought, how do we address the bias, right? How do we, I mean, there are some frameworks, I believe, from IBM and Google and Microsoft to try and help data scientists not do this. But I was curious as to what your thoughts are about what we should be doing.
I think, one, it's about having conversations just like this. It's making people aware that these biases exist and that you have to think about them. And as you look at your data sets that you're using for training data, make sure you have a good representation of the true population, not just the data that you might have access to. Here in the US, the FDA is definitely pushing things in a good direction of part of their requirements, making sure that you do have that good representative data set of different populations as you train the systems, because biases are a dangerous thing. I heard an interesting story a while back, kind of thing, but it was an undergrad doing a research study and looking at data of ER data, and like, oh, there's all this more women are coming in with blood issues. What's the deal with this? And just trying to really explore this idea, and thought he found something that was really interesting. His professor was like, women menstruate, and so they're going to have more of these issues. But it's that thing, is that yes. individual just wasn't thinking about, okay, the population that's coming into the ER, and okay, this isn't rocket science, it's basic biology. And so being aware of the biases is powerful, and then approaching it from there.
And then I guess the last question I had is, so what do you think the future of tech in healthcare is? I mean, we've got blockchain for medical records, which is a big thing people were talking about for a while. We got the metaverse and VR. I even read something about digital twins and virtual simulations. I mean, I think it's personalization. But again, I'm curious to know, because this is an area obviously you're very focused on. What do you think the future of tech is in healthcare?
Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple things. One, the collection of this data and information is going to become more and more passive in our lives. So it's going to happen behind the scenes. As you think of an aging population, there's not enough medical professionals to take care of the aging population. And some of those professionals are aging out themselves. They're retiring. So it's becoming more of a crisis in healthcare globally that there's enough people. And so as, my parents get older, you want them to stay in a good, comfortable environment, the home they've been in for 30 or 40 years. You don't want to have to move them to a care facility or a nursing home. It's like, how can we lengthen their stay in an environment they're very, very comfortable with? And that's where that passive technology comes in. There's definitely some companies already doing this, but putting a sensor under the mattress or on the coffee pot or the toilet seat. So then from that data, mom got up this morning, went to the bathroom as she normally does, got her coffee, opened the refrigerator, and okay, this is good. And that she gets up at 6 o'clock every morning, boom, 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 boom. So if there's a day where she's like, it's 8 o'clock, she hasn't woken up because she's still in bed. Okay, hey, let's call her up and check in and see how you're going. So the idea of passive technology is becoming very powerful. But to be able to understand that data is AI. Like AI is really what's going to be driving so much change in what we do. Not just the chat GPTs, the large language models out there that are going to make a difference, are making a difference today. If you are not experimenting with these tools and technologies, regardless of your profession, you're going to fall behind very quickly, because it's not about what they do today. It's what they're going to be capable of a year, 2 years down the road.
Absolutely,
And it's just accelerating faster and faster.
Yeah.
Well, RJ, thank you for coming today on our podcast. And to everybody listening, we will be back in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.